They told you knowledge would make you free. They never told you it would make you dangerous. And they definitely never warned you what it would cost to see clearly. There comes a quiet moment in every life when something shifts. Not loudly, not with applause, but with discomfort. This chapter is about that moment, the awakening when you stop learning to impress and start learning to understand. Because once knowledge stops being decoration and becomes a weapon, you are no longer innocent. At first, intelligence feels like curiosity. You ask questions, you read books, you listen more than you speak. You think you're just trying to improve yourself. But one day, something changes. You notice patterns, not just in ideas, but in people. You begin to see how often words are used to hide fear, how smiles are worn like masks, how kindness is sometimes a trade, not a gift. This is the first crack in the illusion, and once it appears, it never closes. Most people believe knowledge is about being right, about winning arguments, about proving worth. But Machiavelli understood something deeper. Knowledge is not for showing, it is for seeing. And seeing clearly gives you leverage. When you truly understand how people think, you stop being surprised by them. You stop asking why they betray, why they lie, why they turn cold when you grow. You realize it's not personal. It's human nature. Look around. The loudest voices often know the least. The calm ones? They are watching, learning, waiting. Power rarely announces itself. It enters quietly and settles in places others ignore. History is filled with men who never ruled but controlled everything. Advisors, strategists, thinkers who stood in the shadows while kings stood in the light. They weren't stronger. They weren't louder. They simply understood people better than people understood themselves. This is where intellectual danger begins, not when you gain facts, but when you understand motives. When you realize most actions are driven by fear of loss, hunger for respect, or need for control. Once you see this, conversations change. You stop hearing words. You start hearing intentions. You also realize something unsettling. Truth is rarely welcomed. Most people don't want to see reality. They want comfort. They want stories that protect their identity. And when your insight threatens that story, they don't debate you. They resist you. So you learn restraint. You learn silence. You learn that revealing everything you know is a mistake. Machiavelli warned that a sharp mind shown too early invites enemies before it invites allies. Intelligence, like a blade, is safest when sheathed. This is the part no one prepares you for. Knowledge separates you. It pulls you away from crowds, from easy approval, from simple belonging. You start to feel like you're standing slightly outside the world, watching it move. You notice how praise is given for obedience, not clarity. How questions make people uncomfortable, how insight threatens hierarchy. And slowly, you stop explaining yourself, not because you can't, but because you don't need to. A dangerous mind does not rush to speak. It waits. It observes reactions. It studies silence. It understands that people reveal more when they think they are safe or superior. Think of a chessboard. The beginner sees one move. The average player sees 3. But the master sees the player, their impatience, their habits, their fear of losing. That is where the real game is played. Machiavelli once suggested that understanding people matters more than understanding ideals. Ideals inspire speeches. People decide outcomes. The one who understands this early stops arguing morality and starts studying behavior. This awakening is not exciting. It's heavy, because with clarity comes responsibility. You can no longer hide behind ignorance. You see manipulation where others see charm. You see weakness where others see confidence, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. You begin to understand why some truths are called forbidden, not because they are evil, but because they disrupt order. They expose games. They remove masks. And people protect their masks at all costs, so your mind sharpens. Not with anger, but with distance. You stop reacting. You start calculating. You realize that intelligence is not about dominance, it's about control. Control of self first, control of response, control of direction. This is the awakening. The moment knowledge stops being a hobby and becomes a tool, a mirror, a weapon. And from this moment on, you are no longer harmless. Awakening is not about becoming better than others. It's about becoming harder to deceive. You don't gain power by shouting truths. You gain it by understanding when to stay quiet. This chapter is the moment you step out of innocence and into awareness. And awareness, once earned, never gives you peace. It gives you clarity. This chapter marks the moment you wake up. Intellectual danger begins when you stop chasing validation and start observing human nature without emotion. You realize knowledge is not for display, but for leverage. And once you see the game clearly, there is no going back. At some point after awakening, the world begins to feel different, not darker, just thinner. As if the noise around you lost its meaning and the silence started speaking louder. You don't decide to become distant. It happens on its own. Slowly, quietly. One conversation at a time, you start noticing how often people talk just to avoid thinking. How jokes cover fear. How confidence is sometimes only hunger for approval. And once you notice it, you can't pretend anymore. This is the descent. Not into madness, but into clarity. Intelligence has a strange side effect. It removes your illusions before it gives you peace. You begin to see how fragile loyalty really is. How praise changes when you stop fitting expectations. How people love you most when you reflect who they want to be. You notice that when you grow sharper, calmer, more controlled, some people pull away. Not because you harmed them, but because you changed the balance. Your presence reminds them of what they avoid, and that makes them uncomfortable. Machiavelli understood this deeply. He warned that people rarely hate you for your weakness. They hate you for your strength when it exposes their own limits. So when you think more clearly, when you speak with intention, when you stop reacting the way they expect, you become a problem. This is why intelligence feels lonely. Not because you are above others, but because you are no longer blind with them. You stop enjoying small talk that leads nowhere. You lose patience for fake outrage and shallow dreams. You don't argue anymore, not because you have nothing to say, but because you know how pointless it is to wake someone who enjoys sleep. People mistake this for arrogance, coldness, distance, but it's none of that. It's restraint. You've learned that not every truth needs a witness. Not every thought needs a response. Silence becomes your shield. And in that silence, you start to see how power really works, not through force, but through emotional control. The person who reacts least often controls the room. The one who listens more than they speak learns where the real leverage is. You also start to notice something uncomfortable about yourself. You feel less impressed, less easily moved. Compliments don't hit the same. Criticism doesn't sting as much. You're not numb, you're grounded. This is when loneliness deepens. Because the world still wants you loud, reactive, predictable. But you've changed. You move slower now. You think longer. You weigh words before releasing them. And some people don't like that version of you because they can't read you anymore. History shows this pattern again and again. The thinker who outgrows the group is often pushed aside. The advisor who sees too far becomes a threat. The man who understands the system too well is labeled dangerous, not for what he does, but for what he knows. So you withdraw. Not in bitterness, but in self-preservation. You stop sharing plans with people who only want results. You stop explaining dreams to people who only understand comfort. Loneliness becomes a space, not a sentence. In that space, you train discipline. You learn to sit with your thoughts. You confront your own flaws without distractions. You realize that clarity without self-control turns into paranoia. So, you sharpen both. This is where Machiavelli's thinking becomes personal. He didn't trust easily, not because he hated people, but because he understood them. He knew that trust without awareness is weakness, and awareness without restraint is danger. You begin to choose distance intentionally. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Not everyone earns your honesty. This isn't cruelty, it's boundaries. And slowly, something shifts. Loneliness stops feeling like loss. It starts feeling like alignment. You are no longer surrounded, but you are centered. You understand now why some men prefer solitude. It's not escape. It's clarity. In quiet moments, you see your direction clearly. You stop being pulled by every voice. You become harder to influence. This is the descent most people avoid. They rush back to noise, back to crowds, back to approval. Because silence forces reflection, and reflection demands accountability. But you stay, because you know this phase is not the end. It's preparation. Loneliness is not the enemy of intelligence. It is its shadow. When illusions fall, distance appears. But distance is not emptiness. It is space to grow. And those who endure this phase come back stronger, calmer, and harder to move. This chapter strips away illusions. Intelligence separates you before it empowers you. Loneliness is not punishment, but a consequence of clarity. In solitude, discipline forms and emotional control deepens. And what feels like isolation is actually preparation for power. By now, you have seen too much to be fooled. You have observed patterns others ignore. You have learned silence and solitude. You have felt the weight of knowing too much. Mastery begins not with action, but with restraint. The intellectually dangerous man understands that strength is meaningless without control. A sharp mind in a reckless body is a weapon aimed at itself. Power is not chaos. Power is strategy, and strategy demands patience. You notice how others still react. They shout to prove themselves. They push, pull, and argue to feel secure. You don't. You let them move while you remain unmoved. Your calm becomes your armor. And in that calm, you find freedom. Historical leaders understood this intuitively. The generals who won wars without spilling unnecessary blood. The kings who ruled not through fear alone, but by letting subjects believe they ruled themselves. The advisors whose words were few, but whose presence shaped entire kingdoms. The lesson is clear. The most dangerous influence is subtle. The most effective power is unseen. Machiavelli would call this the art of perception. Not every advantage is gained by force. Sometimes it is gained by appearing weaker than you are. Sometimes it is gained by letting others expose themselves first. A dangerous mind waits for the right moment because it understands the cost of impulsiveness. You begin to see life as a series of choices, each with consequences that ripple farther than most notice. You no longer react to provocation. You no longer argue with ignorance. You do not feel compelled to correct every lie. Because now, every action is measured, every word is deliberate, and every silence carries weight. The world is still loud, chaotic, and desperate. But you have learned to move in quiet. You watch. You listen. You calculate. People mistake your stillness for weakness. They underestimate you. And this becomes your advantage. You learn that intelligence without strategy is vanity, and strategy without discipline is vulnerability. True mastery is the balance of both. You begin to act not for validation, but for alignment with yourself, with reality, with the patterns you now see clearly. There is also a moral dimension. Mastery does not mean exploiting every weakness you see. It does not mean crushing those who cannot defend themselves. It means choosing when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to remain silent. True danger comes from self-control as much as insight. You start to notice subtle shifts in your interactions. People lean toward you when they feel uncertain. They reveal truths they hide from others. They seek your guidance without even knowing it, and yet they never fully see your mind. They never know the depth of your calculation. This is power without display, influence without exposure. You also recognize the quiet joy in independence, the freedom that comes from not needing approval, the confidence of knowing your worth without declaration. The danger of intellect lies not in how much you know, but in how much you can act without losing yourself. Mastery requires solitude again, but this time differently. Solitude is not escape. It is reflection. It is preparation. It is the forge where your mind, sharpened by observation and tempered by restraint, becomes an instrument of influence and clarity. And you understand something fundamental: life will always test your restraint. People will challenge, provoke, and manipulate. But you have learned to see the games before they are played. You do not need to react. You only need to move intentionally. The greatest victories are won before the world even knows a battle began. Now, intelligence is no longer a burden or a curse. It is a tool, a weapon when necessary, a shield when needed, a guide always. And the quiet, deliberate danger you carry is invisible to those who chase noise. They cannot touch it. They cannot comprehend it, and in that invisibility lies ultimate power. You are no longer driven by emotion, reaction, or desire to prove. You are deliberate. You are strategic. You are calm in the storm. You are aware that most people live in comfort or fear, but rarely both. You can navigate both. And in that navigation, you become untouchable. Machiavelli's final lesson is clear. The intellectually dangerous man does not need to dominate overtly. He only needs to maintain control over himself and the perception of others. Influence grows quietly. Power builds invisibly. Mastery lives in silence, patience, and precision. You have arrived. The awakening, the descent, the discipline, all converge into clarity. You are now capable of action without chaos. You are capable of influence without exposure. You are capable of power without destruction. And in that capability lies the true freedom of the mind. Mastery is quiet. It does not seek applause. It does not react to every insult, every challenge, every temptation. It moves deliberately with awareness of self and others. The dangerous mind now acts with strategy and restraint, not impulse. Intellectual power, when mastered, is invisible, untouchable, transformative. This is the final transformation. You are no longer loud, reactive, or desperate to prove intelligence. You are calm, deliberate, and quietly dangerous, exactly as Machiavelli intended. Your power is in control, your influence in silence, and your freedom in awareness. Mastery is the moment knowledge and restraint converge, creating a mind untouchable by chaos.